It clearly says the one single reason we have less social mobility now is because of the abolition of grammar schools.
No, that's certainly not true. And indeed, if you retain grammar schools or have grammar schools, and it's not just a rump, there are 164 grammar schools, and they affect about 40% of the local authorities in this country.
165
so it's not a rump.
Schools?
Look, you've said enough. Just be quiet. And I think that the
oh, charming.
And I think that one of the reasons why, if you take a sort of fully grammar school system like Northern Ireland or like Kent, you've got the longest tail of underachievement just about in the country. In other words, there's less social mobility for those young people in those things. Secondly, I think that what we have seen in the last 50 years is a massive change in the whole social economic context in which we talk about social mobility. Now we're producing more graduates than there are graduate jobs. Therefore, there are less opportunities for people coming through who once upon a time would have had more social mobility, and therefore I think the whole economic and social context has changed. If you really want to improve people's chances, you've got to take seriously what Burnside said: education cannot compensate for society. We have increased in the last 10 years the difference between the rich and the poor, and I think if you really are going to help the poor...
Inequality is at the heart of it, is it?
No, it's really giving people the social and economic possibilities of doing well at schools. Otherwise, you're just going to create dump schools, nothing to do with grammar schools. You've got to put resources into those schools.
Okay, Peter, quickly.
Well, just a couple of things. There are 165 grammar schools in England. There are no grammar schools in Wales. There are no grammar schools in Scotland. Most of the schools in this country, secondary schools, are comprehensive. It is absurd to maintain that grammar schools are available to most people in this country. They simply do not exist for most people. They can't get their children into them. The privileged left-wing middle classes, for whom these people... Be quiet a moment, please. I waited for you. The privileged middle classes for whom these people speak, the privileged left-wing, Guardian-reading middle classes, wangle their schools, wangle their children into good state schools, which are unavailable to most people, by living in wealthy catchment areas or by pretending to be religious.
That's human nature.
That's what they do.
That's human nature.
Under a grammar school system, they couldn't do it. East Germany, and on Anthony Selden's point, East Germany had a comprehensive school system. The moment East Germany collapsed, parents clamoured for the introduction of a selective system, which was, in a matter of a very short space of time, reintroduced.
Anthony, is this a case of a socialist...
The Tory Party and the Labour Party want to do it. Get rid of the Tory Party and the Labour Party.
Anthony, is this... You can see how he achieved at school, because obviously he was very forceful at school, and he's forceful now, and that's why he's on the programme. But is this an example of a kind of a socialist ideal of comprehensive education being bucked by human nature? Because everybody wants the best for their children, as Tony Blair famously said.
Well, of course they do. Every single parent, above all, wants the best school for their child. That's natural, and therefore I think if you go with having a comprehensive system but academic streams, and that nothing that I've heard in this debate doesn't suggest that that's the right way, a heavily academic with very high expectations stream that then children can move into who are late developers is the right way forward. But let me also say the Charity Commission reported this week and had a fantastic opportunity to try and build bridges between the independent and state schools. They didn't go for that. The option they've come out for is taking the best kids out of state schools on bursaries and putting them into the independent system. That is absolutely shameful and an abuse of what they should have been doing. We need to build bridges.
We did that debate about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
But all these people, they all went to private schools. The people who are talking all went to private schools, and yet someone who went to a comprehensive school like me knows what they're really like. And you all theorise, and you'll send your kids to private schools.
You went to Eton. I went to comprehensive schools myself as well.
And you don't seem to realise that...
I think I know my own biography better than you.
Wait a minute. Finish your point.
If the most privileged and powerful people, like probably the next Prime Minister, Cameron, went to Eton, and they send their kids to private schools, maybe Cameron doesn't, then who's going to know about what's going on in the schools? If we have a two-tier education system
went to a grammar school,
where the richest people can pay to send their kids to good school, and the rest of the people have to choose between a grammar and a comprehensive, it's never going to be fair.
People are paying now to live in the nicest areas, so they get the best comprehensive schools. Yes, what would you like to say?
I'm just wondering, grammar schools selective, and the thought behind that was that poorer kids who've got the brains and who have the ability can get into a grammar school.
Into an environment with an ethos of learning. That's
yes,
the kind of thinking.
And I think that in itself is a good idea, but what I'm now wondering is that parents who have got the money, they know the selection's coming up, they can pay to have their children tutored and get them ready for the selection. So really the poorer kids are again disadvantaged to get into these grammar schools.
Is there something wrong with that, paying to have a tutor for your child?
There's nothing wrong with parents caring about their children's education, but the idea that selection somehow magically selects out poor but bright, and that money doesn't play a part is nonsense.
But how do you stop standards being dragged down then?
Who says that standards are being dragged down? I mean, you're making all these assumptions. Peter talks about how to work. Could I just at least make a point about...
Let Margaret make a point.
At least make a point about Northern Ireland. What he didn't say about Northern Ireland is when you look at the qualifications of the population, it is significantly fewer people in Northern Ireland have post-16 qualifications than Scotland, for example, which is fair to compare. You know, it's easy to make these sorts of... The social segregation in Northern Ireland, I mean, there are all sorts of other segregations obviously going on. The social segregation between selective and non-selective schools is huge. I mean, very few poor children get into grammar schools in Northern Ireland.
The danger of talking as though there were masses of poor people in this country who are being failed by bad schools.
It seems expanding middle class,
but I think there is an enormous middle class, and quite a big chunk of it doesn't realise just how tough the challenges their kids will face. And they're not driving them to beat peer pressure, to be academic if they've got an academic drift, to support them. But to say that somehow because they're much less rich than Abramovich, that they can't do this at home, in their rather nice homes in which they are perfectly comfortable with a good deal of leisure, I think it's aspiration on behalf of a huge chunk of parents that are failing.
Douglas, have standards dropped in education?
Look, people will always bandy around statistics on this one, but I just put the following as a suggestion for how to decide this one. Just go around universities in this country and speak to professors and tutors there, and say to them, in your career, have people coming to learn under you, have they over the years known more or roughly less than when you first started? I think you will find very few academics who think that people coming up to university in 2009 will know more than people in 1999, more than people in 1989. There is a reason for that.
Should we ask Professor Blakemore?
I certainly agree with that.
Is that right?
But I think I mean, there's an elephant in this room which we're not discussing. Selection of all sorts, whether it's for private education or for grammar school education, it really is a substitute for the bigger issue, which is the quality of school education generally, which has been in serious decline. And what parents... What parents want to are able to pay for their kids to go to private school or are desperate for their kids to have access to grammar school really want is just higher quality education throughout. And the idea that people will rise from schools of other backgrounds in order to be able to qualify to get to grammar school, I think is wrong unless the quality of teaching is there in all schools. It's education, education, education. I'm afraid
somebody said that once.
Someone said it.
I think, Anthony, you wrote a couple of books about it. Councillor, you tried to, Andy, isn't it? You tried to set up a grammar school in Milton Keynes. You believe in the ethos of it very much indeed. Tell these people why they're wrong about grammar schools.
Well, first of all, these people are largely professional educationalists, and they're talking from the supply side. I think I'm representing the parents. The parents want better education for their children, and no matter what you criticise about the selective system, at least some of the children from the poor areas got into grammar schools. Now, none of them get into a decent school because largely the poor areas have got weak comprehensive schools that are not delivering.
Professor?
That's what the parents think, and you're not going to persuade them any otherwise.
The evidence is, again, if you go back to the Crowther report 50 years ago, it demonstrated that the majority of those very few who actually came from the unskilled working class actually left the grammar school, left without any qualification whatsoever, not even an O-level. And so it's a myth that somehow this glorious thing, this rescue of these people...
Wait a minute, can we have another statistic here? Can we have just one other statistic here which belies this?
Well, hang on, order. I'm the headmaster. Okay, on you go.
Okay, if you look, and it's in the Franks report, and it's in Anthony Sampson's Anatomy of Britain, if you look at the numbers of people coming from state schools to Oxford and Cambridge, they were rising steadily, approaching 70% without any special measures to get them in until the abolition of the grammar schools, whereupon the numbers went down. State school pupils getting to Oxford and Cambridge must be an indication of something important.
Like Manchester Grammar School, which actually
no, they didn't. They came from direct grant schools
and
grammar schools.
Bidisha.